conversation. Are we live?
Are you guys ready for me to start the webinar and take you live, or do you need a few more minutes?
We were already rolling, I think. So.
Oh,
Yeah.
Apologies, Mike.
Yeah, sorry I'm late to the party.
Hi, Brandon.
worries, we're good.
I had
I'm
to
gonna
update
start
my
the
Zoom.
webinar.
Apparently, I haven't used my Zoom in so long. I had to update my outdated version. So
Sweet.
I know I haven't done that in a minute.
How you know COVID numbers are down. All right, start webinar. Here we go, and then I'll go live on Facebook. So just give me a second, and Chris, I'll signal you here when we are rolling.
All right. Should we start right away, Al? Is that what you're thinking, or should we sort of sit here for a second?
Sit here for a quick second. Yep, just one.
I just got a notification that we are now streaming live on Facebook.
All right, you guys are now live streaming on Facebook.
Great, thank you. All right, good evening, everybody. My name is Chris Newberg. I'm a board member at the Michigan Music Alliance. I am the moderator for tonight's B-side session, which is on the topic of booking contracts. And I'm going to kind of expand that to say booking negotiation best practices and booking contracts, maybe, because they're all kind of part of the same, the same sheet here. We've got a great set of panelists with us tonight. We've got Lara Supan. I might be saying the last name wrong. Caroline Bartow, Brandon DeJaynes, and Scott Hammontree. Maybe I'll just kind of start with Lara, and we can go around the circle here, whatever the circle looks like on your screen, and you can all introduce yourselves quickly, and then we'll just jump into it. Lara, I'll let you take it from here.
Sure. Hello, everybody. I am a booking agent at Fleming Artists and vice president of the agency. We are based in Ann Arbor, but we represent folks nationally and in Canada as well. So some of the folks that I represent, Carsey Blanton, Chris Matthews, Scott Cook, and many others, Sweet Lizzie Project, I could go on, Lily Lewis. Everyone is playing at Blissfest this year, right, Caroline? But anyway, I'm super happy to be here. And yes, I'll pass it on to the next folks.
All right, Caroline.
That's right. Hi, guys. I'm Caroline Barlow, talent buyer with Blissfest Music Organization. And as Lara mentioned, we have an annual festival every July. We also do year-round programming, concerts, and most of the artists she mentioned are playing. Chris Matthews, Scott Cook next week. Carsey Blanton played our festival this summer. So we have a lot going on, and booking is my life. Booking is life.
Excellent. Thank you. Brandon, do you want to go next?
yeah, hey guys, thanks for tuning in. I'm Brandon. I do the booking and promotion at the Livery in Benton Harbor, Michigan. We're a 250 capacity venue focused on live original music, mostly local bands, regional bands, and then we get a decent swath of national touring headliners coming through. Just glad to be here and hopefully shed some light on the subject.
Great, thank you. And then last but certainly not least, Scott. Oh, can you unmute there, Scott?
Sorry, I'm out of Zoom practice as well. Hello, everybody. I'm Scott Hammontree. I'm the operator and partner talent buyer at the Intersection. I've been here for 19 years. The Intersection has 4 different venues in one building, a 1,500 cap, an 800 cap, 400 cap, and then a small room that does around 200 people. We're celebrating our 50th year as a business, which is pretty amazing for a concert venue to be around this long. We're consistently a top 50 club for Polestar ticket sales, and I'm just happy to be a part of this.
Thank you all. Yeah, so I mean, like, this is a really interesting group of folks for this conversation because we've got one person on the agent side and then 3 people on the venue side. And really, from an artist perspective, I think it's important to know, you know, how the buyers are seeing stuff. So I'm excited to have this conversation. I guess just for a little bit more information on myself too, because I'm going to be sort of injecting myself a little bit more than usual as a moderator tonight. I am an attorney in Grand Rapids. I do a lot of entertainment law, so I put together these booking contracts, and I can talk about some of those terms. I'm also a musician in the band Gunner and the Grizzly Boys, so I've experienced some of these issues firsthand as an artist myself. So with that, I might be, you know, kind of making some comparisons or speaking from, you know, more of like the lawyer's perspective when it comes to some of these questions, and we'll see where that goes. And on that note, I think it's important to first address what a contract is, you know, because we're talking about booking contracts. A contract is basically an agreement between 2 or more parties that is intended to be legally enforceable. Contracts can take many forms. Usually written is best because there's no doubt. A contract can be the product of an email exchange. It can be a formal written document, you know. So I guess kind of having that basic foundation work, I kind of want to turn it back to the group and you know, maybe ask why it's important to have a contract in the first place. And I think to start off, we'll talk to Lara here to maybe get like an artist agent perspective.
Sure. Especially, I mean, you don't even need to have an agent, but one of the things that we do that we can shed light on if you do not have an agent is why we have contracts. We were just chatting right before the webinar, but you know, a lot of times these days, especially with COVID, we are not following contracts on both sides. There are a lot of conversations that are happening where the contract is not being upheld. So what good is a contract if you're not planning on suing someone, which a lot of times, especially if you're talking shows that are making less than $10,000, you're most likely not going to do, let's be honest. So really what the contract is that we do with Fleming is mainly making sure that we're all on the same page with the details, and not just the details of the show, but for something like a radius clause, right? So a radius clause is if you can't play within a certain location, 50 miles or so within a certain amount of time, that protects the show. It also protects you because you shouldn't be playing and dragging all of your folks out to choose 1 out of 3 or 4, because it's not great practice. So having a radius clause in there, especially on the venue side, we want to make sure that you actually respect that. That normally goes on the contract. Any details like hospitality, especially if there's a buyout involved, is really great to have on the contract. And there are a lot of other things that you would really just want to make sure that they've seen. And by signing it, they say that they've seen it. So I really feel like the contract is more of an agreement right now, saying that we're going to abide by these things, and less of a legal, you know, I'm going to sue you if you don't follow everything that's on here. There's also a lot of boilerplate language as well that I think the venues can cover. I think it's great that we have so many different level size venues, because I would say the contracts really are a little different for each. You know, our boilerplate language has stuff like green rooms on them, but a lot of places that are 100 capacity or less aren't going to have a green room or a house concert, right? So a lot of times we'll even send out our contract that is the same for 100 cap or a stadium, and say to these folks, you know, if you are uncomfortable with any of these pieces, just let us know, and we will make sure that you know we don't expect you to fulfill those. But it's good to have that exchange so that you're starting in the same place and nobody's surprised when they show up.
Thank you. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess if I'm hearing you correctly, the idea being sort of that if you can reach agreeable terms on a contract, there should be no confusion as to what the requirements or expectations are, right?
Yeah, it's a protection for both the venue and the artist. Even if it's not followed to the T, at least it's in writing what the expectation was on both sides. So there's something to start from if there's a disagreement, because we always want to hope for the best and prepare for the worst, right? This is a business. So we should treat it like a business, even if it's via email, even if it's not something that is specifically being signed by both parties. The more details that you can include on an official document, it makes it easier the day of the show.
Great. Well, I want to throw a question out to more the talent buyer side here, and I'm gonna start with Scott, just because Scott, we know like the different size rooms the intersection has, anything from small to big. When it comes to these contracts, are you typically requiring them for every act that comes in the door, or what's your threshold? Like, when do you know that they're necessary?
I agree with almost everything Lara said. Like there should be a basic agreement, right, that we go through. But as far as who we're requiring it of, I mean, I've done business with plenty of acts via email. They're like, "Do you want a contract?" I'm like, "No, we're good." Like we've been here for 19 years, but to receive the volume of contracts that we do, I'm probably looking at 1,000 a year. It can be a bit daunting. So I generally want them all for every act that's playing. I don't love having a tour manager come into the building and my manager's trying to settle a show, with expenses that are different or whatever it may be. I think the biggest issue that I would bring up is that a lot of times what is in those contracts doesn't always reflect the agreement. And then getting to a point where both parties are comfortable seems to be becoming more difficult than it has in the past. Or, you have an offer that an artist has accepted, the agent has accepted.
Uh-oh. Well, we'll see if Scott comes back online here, hopefully. Well, Caroline, maybe you can speak to it a little bit too, with respect to your experience, and then we'll jump to Brandon, because I think you all have an interesting perspective here.
Yeah. Oh, is he back? Yeah.
Okay. Well, we can hear you again, Scott.
Sorry, my
Yeah,
internet.
Scott, go ahead.
Oh, good. Well, we're going to pass it to Caroline real quick, just to talk about the same question, sort of from her perspective here. Why are you guys using contracts? Like, what's important to your organization when it comes to the use of contracts?
Yeah, so also in addition to what Laura said, 100% agree, is that it really helps our flow for like the rest of the team. So like our bookkeeper wants a contract from everybody, whether or not they have an agent or not, just for like the payout purpose. So it's like everything's in one clean form, not, she doesn't have to be copied on every email I sent. And sometimes, it's like I'm making offers via text or Facebook Messenger, hopefully not that though, email. So if I get, private message on Instagram and she's like, okay, let's just streamline everything into a contract. And if you don't have an agent, you could come to us with like a contract you've written, or sometimes Blissfest has actually made our own version of an offer that turns into a contract once you sign it. So it's just a clean way to say, this is what we offer. That's now like a contractual thing that they sign, in addition to our rider, which I guess we might talk about later. So it really just helps streamline the process for everybody involved. Yeah, for myself, bookkeeping to marketing, to the day of show production, all of that. Oh, Chris, you're muted. Yeah, go ahead.
Everybody's got the Zoom faux pas tonight. Myself most certainly included. Yeah, no, I think that's important. It comes back to this idea that the contract is kind of the heart of the information. It's where everything is, so yeah, it probably makes it a lot easier, I guess, from a venue's perspective, to know what to prepare for if those terms are laid out. I guess, Caroline, I'm going to bounce back to you real quick, and I'm going to ask this question to just about everybody. Are you writing your own contracts typically, or are you accepting artist contracts, or how do you balance that?
Right. So if they have an agent, it comes from the agency, and if they're self-represented, we present something that we write. But it doesn't include as much as an agency's would. Like, actually, we don't really have those clauses. It's more of just like, you're playing here, this is the guarantee, this is the deposit. The be cool clause, like, if you talk to us, because everything is negotiable pretty much, right? And that's what can feel overwhelming initially, but honestly, that's really the best policy. And if you don't like it, then talk about it or cross it out.
Yeah, a lot of times we will actually sign too. So we'll have the venue contract and we will sign it in return. And then we will send the venue a contract. They will sign it in return. It's just there are some venues, especially festivals, that like they need us to sign their own contract, and it's, you know, it's all good. Like at least we're not wasting paper. It's
Right.
all-
We have our own rider, which is probably more like a venue contract. Yeah, for our festival that kind of overrides hospitality. So that probably more of answers your question, Chris, because we send a rider to everybody that plays our festival that's like, this is the basic food hospitality we're providing. We're not doing each individual thing, other than like the top tier will provide special alcohol. You know, this is the general radius clause for everybody that plays, unless you ask nicely. This is, you know, the lodging situation. So we have a blanket Blissfest rider for everybody. Yeah, for the festival.
Okay, great. Yeah, and we're gonna like talk about different sections of the contract next, and the rider's probably gonna be the most interesting part. So I'll definitely want to, you know, kind of hammer on that a little bit more, and I'll be interested to kind of hear if Scott's got a rider or, you know, how they go about receiving them. But before we get to that point, Brandon, I wanted to hear from you, and I will say that you know Brandon sent an email before today and kind of expressed I think the sentiment that might be echoing through the talent buyers and venues minds right now when it comes to some of these issues. But I'm definitely interested in hearing you kind of elaborate more on those. But I guess to get back to the question, when are you guys using contracts? Do you have your own? In what situations do you like to use them, and are they helpful to you?
Yeah, you know, there's always going to be some kind of basic agreement in writing. As a small venue, kind of representing the smaller side of things, growing bands that are local, regional, that don't have an agency, don't have a management. A lot of times bands are just hitting me up directly. Our binding agreement is oftentimes an email. I sure like to be as, specific and detailed as possible. We kind of talked about force majeure or something like that comes up. There's so many extenuating circumstances in this new era of live music, if you will. We've been seeing things, I've never had bands cancel for COVID before, the last 2 years. So that's been interesting. That still can come up. But, it's just more of a human conversation there in a small venue. As kind of Laura said earlier, when our shows aren't really generating those high dollars, it's just kind of tying our hands as a small venue. There's not a whole lot of recourse that we could have, even with a binding agreement. It's hard to enforce or even spend the, time going after someone for, a small amount of money at the end of the day. That it's a small venue. It's kind of left us behind the ball, so to speak, in some lost revenues. We understand illness happens. Cars and vans break down. We actually had a show with Tantric. Their catalytic converter was stolen off of their vehicle, and then the muffler shot out of the sidewall of their van, spun them off the road. They had to rent cars, and they made it late. Show went on, but there was some kind of moments of the wheels turning of like, what are we going to do if they can't make it? So on the small venue side of things, it almost feels like there's a limitation of, the contract enforcement and really just having the resources to go after or even recoup any kind of losses, advertising dollars or, guarantees and deposits and all that. So on my side of things, it's a lot of emails that are verbally binding. And then if there's an actual contract that we're signing and sending back, it's on behalf of the agency or the artist. And usually those are very thorough. As Laura has sent me a couple. Yeah, they do a great job. So it makes me feel, comfortable. And a lot of times we're booking Michigan bands anyway. So being in part of that community, we all kind of know each other. There's, a sense of self-accountability, and reputation does go a long way by ear and mouth here. So I don't think anyone's trying to shoot themselves in the foot. But yeah, it's a different perspective on our behalf. I'm the guy that's always slashing the rider, like Laura said, they'll send the stadium rider. We're a 250 cap venue, no bathroom in our green room, and we have our own kitchen and our own beer. So, we do a lot of stuff in-house, and, it's a cozy angle, but, nothing on the, generating our own contract kind of level, but.
Certainly. Yeah, well, I think that, what we're hearing is the takeaway. I mean, and this is a pro artist, right? Organization, of course. Well, we're pro everybody in music, but really, I think it's artists that are watching this. It seems like, typically the booking contract tends to favor the artist in most situations because of the enforceability component. I'm sure there are times where venues require them absolutely, and Caroline, I think you might have mentioned, or maybe it was Lara, I forget, bigger acts coming in or like larger festivals presenting their own contracts, of course, because they want their terms to be written down. But perhaps you should always be a little skeptical when somebody else offers to write the contract. Maybe that's just the legal takeaway here. But Scott, is there ever a situation where the intersection is writing the contract, or are you mostly dealing with the contracts you receive from artists and agents?
We never write a contract. If there are a certain amount of acts that just have a long history here, and that's all done like via email. Some of those have graduated to agencies. So yes, I do get the 35-page contract and riders for some of those, but 100% always receiving contracts.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. And Brandon, I'm bouncing back to you real quick, just because you kind of mentioned this. Do you find it easier to work with an artist when they're self-represented or when they have an agent, and in the context of dealing with a contract? And if so, or if not, why?
Oh man, Laura's gonna hate me. At our scale, it's so personal. We like to entertain the bands when they come in, make them feel cozy and part of our Livery family. So when a band does graduate to an agency, it's kind of a different angle. I'm not talking to the band that I've come to know and love. I'm talking to an agent who's kind of playing some hardball with me at times. Usually that means a little bit more money in the guarantee and, maybe a little bit more risk for us, but hopefully, that band has established themselves with us and we feel comfortable moving forward. I know Fleming has represented some great Michigan artists, so no knock on them at all. You guys are great. But I always prefer to work directly with the artist. It just feels more personal to me. We can kind of get down to brass tacks and there's no middleman, so to speak. That's kind of my quick take on it.
Awesome, thank you. Caroline, what's your take on that? A slightly different perspective, but maybe similar.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, I do love working directly with the bands as well, but in defense of agents, it does sometimes you get like the paperwork, like all the stuff you need tends to come in one package, which is easier, and sometimes the artists are focused on the other part and not the business part. And I'm not awesome at the business part. I still owe Lara a contract, I think, the signed one. So it's, all that said, it is sometimes easier with an agent just to get the whole thing at once. The artist can do their thing, the business side can do their thing, and it's just a little bit cleaner that way. And we do develop friendships, but totally love working with artists directly as well. And at Blissfest, at the festival, we have the whole gamut of stuff. So we kind of have to be ready to handle all of those details, which can be complicated to organize. Sometimes that's the hardest part. Quick side note, I've always wanted to ask Lara this, but have agencies thought about having a Bliss festival version of contracts? Because more often than not, it doesn't relate to us. And I'm like, should I even spend the time slashing it out or just leave it? Because we know it's not like it doesn't have teeth half the time. Or could there be agencies that send you, this is the band's festival contract, this is their venue contract, this is the house concert one?
Yeah, I mean, I think agencies do different things. We actually have the two different contracts that we have are a venue contract and a house concert contract. Right, because no house concert has a green room.
Right. Yeah, you were saying that.
It freaks them out when we're like, we need a first-class sound system, and they're like, what? No, I don't have that. But I agree that a lot of times festivals, especially when you're talking about indoor versus outdoor venues,
Yeah,
things are
exactly.
very, very different. And also, you know, a lot of the hospitality is extremely different between festivals. So yeah, I think there are some agencies that do have it. And I don't think, but I could be wrong. And Carla's not on here because Carla's our office admin and she has the expert answer to especially the history of Fleming on all of this. But I think we've only done the one venue contract, but I think a festival contract probably does exist for a number of agencies. So yeah, I think sky's the limit and make whatever you want.
Mhm.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so it probably makes sense to talk about contractual provisions that are relevant to a musician or relevant in a booking contract, you know, because we keep talking about why they're important and you know, whether it makes sense or whether it's easy to deal with an agent versus a band. Maybe we can kind of just make it all the same by informing people, you know, who are representing their own bands, how to at least talk about some of the basic important terms here. And a few of these things have popped out already. I think, you know, we talked about basic terms um like that you'd see on a term sheet, whether that's made part of the contract or not. Talked about, of course, everybody wants to talk about payment, radius clauses, stuff like that. But I'm trying to figure out how to make this as efficient as possible. But in terms of provisions that you deem essential for an artist who is maybe playing shows in the $1,000 to $5,000 range, if we're just kind of putting, you know, some barriers around it. Lara, what do you see as being crucial terms to include in a contract, whether we call them the formal name or just, you know, the effect of what that term you know, is?
Sure. I think in that range, like I said, most of it is like details. So if you're listing when you're supposed to be there, how long you're supposed to play. So, you know, you don't get there and somebody asks you to play for 3 hours when it was contracted that you're only going to be playing for 45 minutes and you don't have that length of a set. Or if they've picked some local opener and you had been advertising it as an evening with, which means no opener, and you didn't agree to that and you don't feel like it's appropriate for them to be having somebody on before you. Just hammering out the detail is like very important. But the two that I would say that are like in our, well, even the one that's like in our boilerplate language, that is, you know, if you don't know what the term boilerplate is for those listening, it's just, it means like the norm, the common things. So one of the biggest pieces is what people have been talking about before, which is the force majeure. That protects both the venue and the artist. When it's coming from the artist side, it's mostly written for the artist. When it's coming from the venue side, it does protect the venue. But what it means is things out of your control. If you have to cancel the show, that you're not liable for whatever the offer was. So for instance, I had an artist this weekend that lost her voice and she could not play the show. Luckily, everybody was obviously fine. So you don't want an artist trying to sing for 3 hours when they can't sing. So the venue is fine with it. But if for any reason they were trying to say that they were, you know, they were going to go after that artist for not showing up, it's in the contract. Force majeure just means things outside of your control. So act of God, everybody's written in pandemic now, even though that was not written in before, but let's be kind. Yes, of course. And then illness in general, like government, there are some really specific things that are in force majeures that are pretty funny. But it just basically says, if these things happen, the contract does not exist anymore. So on the venue side, for instance, and something, if you get a venue or you get a contract from a venue to look at, is how long the venue has to cancel without penalty. So especially for an outdoor show, look for that weather force majeure or, you know, cancellation policy, because a lot of people have some really interesting cancellation policies. Like they can cancel up till like, you know, noon that day without any penalty whatsoever. And if you're driving for 5 hours to go to the show, you probably want to talk to them about that and say, I need to know by the night before. I don't want to be on the road and find out that the show is canceled. So that is a big one. Force majeure in general, it just protects everybody. So I would say that's one of the most important ones. And to just understand radius clause and the consequences of breaching the radius clause on the artist side. and what exactly a radius clause means, right? So is it a private show? Is it completely out of the question that you cannot book anything within that time period or that mileage? And do you just have to run it by the venue and get approval, et cetera? Because it's just really important to respect it. Again, I think radius clauses are there for a reason. And I also think that the venue and that area knows why the radius clause is there. You know, it's always negotiable, but like, you're not an expert in that town. The venue is the expert in that town. They know how far people drive to go see a show in that town from other towns. So if they're telling you that you're going to be cannibalizing your audience, if you're playing 50 miles away, I would suggest listening to them. So that is a really important part of the contract as well, not for legal purposes, but just for human, realistic purposes.
Great, thank you. And on the topic of radius clauses, just because you know we're on the topic, how do you usually see those written up? And I've seen them a couple different ways where it's like, you know, a certain number of days before the show, you can't play within this radius, certain number of days after the show, you can't play within this radius. But how are you seeing those typically, Lara? How are you writing them?
Well, we certainly don't enforce our own radius clauses. Sure. We don't protect our artists from themselves. But I mean, they really run the gamut. Like, especially now that we've introduced live streams, there's like different radius clauses for live stream blackouts too, which is just like, woo, it's getting really complex. But yeah, you can see a couple that are pre and post show, a certain number of days on either side of it. Sometimes those aren't matching. So it might be 45 days pre-show, 60 days post-show, and a certain radius. So, you know, 50 miles. I don't think I've ever seen more than 100 miles, but like out in Colorado, you can get some pretty large mileage because there's nothing. So people do travel that far to go between, especially like festivals and stuff. Actually, I think one festival says like literally half the state you can't play, which again, I feel like is reasonable. But the other one is an advertising radius clause, so an advertising blackout, which means that you cannot be advertising a future show, not just playing a future show within that period. You cannot announce that there will be a show in that market during a certain period of time, which is way more strict than actually just playing the show. So those are the two that I see. And yeah, it's always going to have, if it doesn't have a set amount of days, make sure you know what the set amount of days is. It shouldn't just be open-ended. Like you can't play within 50 miles until when, right? Because that kind of leaves you open a little bit vulnerable. So yeah, you want a set number of days before the show and after the show, and then you want to set mileage.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I guess to be clear to the people watching too, that's probably a term that the buyer is going to put in the contract, just because if you think about the way that contracts work, it's imposing rights and responsibilities, and you probably, you know, looking out for yourself, want to be imposing rights rather than responsibilities. But you know, in order to impose a right, you have to impose a responsibility on somebody else. So it's certainly understandable why a venue would do that. And I Lara, your point resonated with me about, you know, a buyer, a venue doesn't want you to cannibalize your own audience. So it's really kind of for your own good if you want the show to be successful. And in a sense, you're business partners with the venue when you're entering into an agreement like this. So your interests are aligned in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I think was it with you, Brandon, or was somebody else that was on? We did a different one where we were talking about a specific Michigan band that I booked that has like unusual draw in Michigan. So our radius clauses are a lot less strict for them because we know we can play like 17 different cities in Michigan over the year. So there is some when you push back, and Scott, I think we might have played Intersection, one of those. I think we had words about it. But there is sometimes when I feel like maybe I or the band knows better about where their draw is, but that is very few and far between. I mean, normally what I would suggest is, yes, of course it's coming from the venue, but I still think that it's an extremely important part of a contract and to make sure that we're upholding that piece of it. Just because you're absolutely right. Most of the time the venue is going to know And that is something to trust them on. That's how I feel 9 times out of 10.
Certainly, yeah. And I think another important takeaway is if you sign a booking agreement, as an artist with a radius clause, yeah, you should probably know what it means, and you should probably follow it, because you don't want to breach your contract. Even if you don't get sued, you're probably going to be blackballed by the venue. Not a great position to be. It's not a good look. Like, do what you say you do, right? Caroline, Brandon, Scott, I realize I'm asking all three of you this question, so feel free to blurt it out. But like from a talent buyer's perspective, are you always going with radius clauses, or does it depend on perhaps the financial outlay, if we will, being paid to the artist?
I'll grab that one. I think it's both. Like certain genres, I can look at my zip codes from my ticket purchasers, and I know that for this genre of music, whether it's electronic or country, I have people driving from less than 100 miles or 120 miles. So I might be more sensitive to the radius clause. And then bigger traffic, bigger festivals, all that kind of stuff. But in short, like, I feel like the agencies of late have done a really good job of asking, like, hey, will you clear this play? Will you clear this play? I've got more of those emails in the last month than I think I got my previous 5 years. And I appreciate it. And it is crucially important. Like, we know that 100 kids might drive to Detroit for that show, and then my show is going to do 100 people less, but I'm supposed to pay the same amount. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think at the Livery, we kind of have a sliding scale, if you will, in terms of our radius clauses. Our local bands, I mean, they should play our local venues and build a local following. I really don't want to inhibit that at all. But in the same regard, I want the play at the Livery to be something special and unique. If they're playing, a bar down the road for free, why would they want to pay to come and see this band at the Livery? So, we need to be cognizant of some breathing room, creating a market demand again for our local band, and also maybe creating a unique angle for the show itself, to maybe showcase a side of the band that they haven't displayed yet throughout the summer. So it's a, careful, balance in that local band thing. But then you get to the regional or even national touring bands, and sometimes people don't even know where Benton Harbor is, and they think that maybe Kalamazoo is a good play, and it's like, well, I'm wanting to draw from there. If you're a national touring band, looking at Intersection as well, I mean, you guys have a room about our size, so I want to be cognizant that show's going to exist and be successful. Some of the regional bands, I don't mind having a show at Bell's on the night before, depending on what's going on around us. But yeah, it kind of varies, and it's more of a case by case basis in our case. But when it comes to like a national touring band, we kind of want to be the only show on the west side, so to speak. And I'm looking at South Bend, at Kalamazoo, at Grand Rapids, what's going on there. Let's keep that clear, and look at Ann Arbor or Detroit for that follow-up play in Michigan. But when it comes to a local band or a regional band, I want those bands to hit as many rooms as possible, and hopefully those people will filter into our venue when that band comes through and grows. So it's a bit of both, really.
Yeah, well said. That was exactly what I was going to say, and I was going to give a shout out to Lara for being one of those agents that knows where your town is and knows the small towns nearby, and calls and checks in on that. And it's always a conversation. So that's why these relationships I think are really important, is that you can be honest, and it's not just playing games, because we need each other right now. They need to succeed, and so do we. And at our festival, it's tough, right? Because we definitely want those local musicians to get their play. Sometimes the guarantee does kind of depend on whether or not we're open to a radius change or not. But even our headliner in 2018, like Mary Chapin Carpenter, played the Arc, had a sold out show, and we had a sold out festival. So that was a win-win scenario there. But depending on that, our draw can be affected. But we're also a festival that people just want to go to. It's not always headliner driven. So in the end, we want the artists to to succeed. So we don't worry as much about the festival as we do concerts is a little bit harder because we're like, please buy tickets to these shows and fill the house. That's all I have to say about that.
Thank you. Yeah, no, so this is just one relatively small term in a booking contract. I think the radius clause issue, but I think it's really important. And so we spent a little bit of time on it. The reason it's important is because it can sneak in there, especially if you're an artist and you get a contract from a venue, you want to know what it means. You want to know how it affects you, and you want to know those things so you don't breach the contract, and so that you're on the same page with the venue. Also, maybe it's like a little bit flattering, like, oh, they think we're so good that, you know, they don't want us playing another show around town. I don't know, but we'll keep it positive and we can think about it that way from an artist perspective, right? But yeah, that's probably a pro venue term. Lara, you mentioned force majeure. I know, you know, speaking from my band's experience, one thing that we were advised to do, or one thing that somebody told us to do, I don't know if they were advising us or what, but like put some COVID language in there. So I wrote up basically an extension of force majeure for our contract addressing COVID-19. You know, like if we test positive, we can't come play, obviously. But this was written at a time where you know, it was a little bit more of an active threat, and we were afraid of going into places that were going to just openly disregard COVID-19, you know, safety procedures or laws, you know, put into place. And so that became an important part of our contract. Are you all seeing more COVID language in booking contracts now? And if so, do you think that's going to stay there, or do you think that morphs into like just a general health and well-being type of force majeure language? Or I don't know, where's that going?
I mean, I can answer that from seeing probably the most like interspersed throughout the nation contracts. People are just over COVID, especially the audience, not so much the artists sometimes. But and it's tricky because the artists have to take off their mask, you know, like if you're in the audience, you can choose to wear a mask, you can choose not to wear a mask, but you can't really sing in one. But what I see most like coming from the venues, it's what we normally put in our like additional terms section of our contract. We certainly haven't written it into the hard language of the contract because things are so consistently changing right now. But what we hear from the venue is we are going to follow CDC guidelines. That's just you know, that's like a really nice blanket statement that will change with the CDC guidelines that are changing every week, every month, whatever it is, for not just COVID, but like whatever is the next one too. So that's generally what we hear from them. If we have an artist that is still insisting on like mask language or vaccination requirement language, we can certainly write it in there. What I can say from what I've seen is that most venues are not willing to commit to it anymore. Like across the country, even in Canada, I've had people just say, and especially like if I'm trying to book something, you know, we book 6 to 12 months in advance, and the contracts go out 6 to 12 months in advance. So a lot of folks are not ready to commit to saying that they're going to enforce masks in May of next year. I also don't think that's reasonable because we have no idea where we're going to be at all, you know. So it's not something that's normally included in our contracts. What we normally put it in is the rider. So, I mean, it might be a lovely segue into riders, but riders I find are a lot more personal per artist, and therefore they can write it in the hard language of their rider, and it can be changed because they can send multiple versions of the rider out. It's less binding than a contract, at least what we have, even though it's signed, there's less legal language on it. So that's normally where any like specific artists' COVID recommendations, requirements, or requests end up.
Great. Well, from like a venue perspective, and I just kind of thought of this while we were talking about it, like obviously artists want to keep themselves safe, but you know, at least some artists do anyway. What about venues who are afraid of artists who don't care about the health and safety of others potentially coming in? I mean, are any of the rest of you, you know, from like more of a talent buyer position, are you trying to get any language in contracts that says, hey, like don't be a dingus, you know, like we're probably past the point of requiring testing, but are you seeing any COVID language that you like to include in these contracts?
I guess I would add that I'm seeing less and less of the COVID language, and just like Laura said, it all comes in the rider. So I typically want to know if there are going to be COVID requirements for the audience, like right from the get-go. That if I get it from the artist and it's relatively reasonable, you know, but then there's an expense with that, right? That you didn't know when you were booking the show. And like, I have a show very soon where I'm going to have to test, 20 people. So I literally got all those tests in, yesterday to be prepared for it. So I would say like Laura said, it's kind of going away. I don't see a lot of stuff from agencies. If it's a big issue for the artist or something they really want to stress, I've made aware of that before the show confirms that, hey, we're, this is this kind of show, and does this change anything?
Yeah, I mean, we're still seeing cancellations due to COVID, but as we spoke about earlier, there's not a whole lot you can do if an artist cancels unless you really, really want to sue. And so you're kind of just trusting that really was the reason. And and it ripples out through their tour. So that's unfortunate, but it's certainly still happening because of that.
Well, yeah, that's probably another one of those terms that tends to probably lean more pro artist. And again, I realize that 3/4 of our panel here is on the venue side, not like we're picking sides or anything, but I think from an artist perspective, if you feel unsafe, it probably makes sense to put one in, but maybe be cognizant of the fact that you don't want to impose undue hardship on a venue, because as we're going to get to, that can affect your ability to get a contract signed, and it can derail your negotiations, which is an essential component of actually getting a contract signed.
Yeah, we actually had a recent where one of our artists asked for masks required at all of their shows, and most places said no. And it was like, you can either not play here, or you can say masks are recommended. And that's just the way of the world right now, I guess. But I will say, it's funny because you say that the COVID language, like cancellations for COVID is artist driven. I just had a venue almost have to cancel because like half of their staff had COVID and they didn't have enough staff to run the venue. So it actually happens on the venue side too. Luckily, the show actually played, but it was one of those things where they had to make the decision literally the day of to see who was testing negative, like close enough that they could actually come in.
Wow. Yeah. So that truly is kind of like a force majeure event in the context of COVID.
Right. Right.
No way
Exactly.
it could happen, maybe. Yeah.
I mean, and it's so funny that it's gone, right? Everyone, COVID's gone, right?
Okay, so we've covered a few of the overall, or like a few of these basic terms. I think that it probably makes sense to jump back up to the top of the document, because I've got a booking contract in my mind that I'm envisioning, and it's the one that I wrote for my band. And maybe we kind of talk about the structure of it, but like what I like to do on ours is the first page is the term sheet, and we talked about the date, the duration, the start time, the end time, all these key facts that should go onto the term sheet portion. Maybe this is the part of the contract that changes every time you book a gig, and then the rest of the contract, as we say, is the boilerplate language. And boilerplate just means you can copy and paste it and put it in any contract, and it doesn't make a difference because it's just sort of reserving certain rights. For the term sheet, I know we talked about the date, the time, the location, the venue, the artist name should be there. I'm going to kind of take liberties and speak a little bit longer than I should as a moderator. One thing that I've always liked to do is make sure that I actually know who the buyer is, from like in terms of like a legal entity, because just because, like Blissfest, for example, and maybe it probably is a bad example, but like if someone just says Blissfest, like I don't know if that's an LLC, I don't know if that's a corporation, I don't know if that's a person doing business as this. And in order for a contract to be legally enforceable, it has to be between you and a legal entity, whether that's a person or a business. So that's always been a struggle. Like whenever I get a contract or a gig pitched to me, it's always like, well, who are you? And that can be an awkward question to ask people sometimes. I'm just thinking through term sheet stuff, and I'm gonna promise I'll make a question out of this. probably want to know the event name. Maybe you want to know the other artists on the bill, if any. Whether it's an evening with or not. Like, yeah, we want to know if there's going to be other people there, if it's not implied by the name. Some buyers are very particular about the load-in time and sound check time, it seems. So sometimes that's an important term to get in there if they're going to hold you to it. Production contact information can be helpful. From your all's perspective, what else do you consider to be essential terms? Such that we wouldn't know what's going on without this information being established. And maybe I'll start with Brandon, and then we can kind of make a oddly shaped loop.
Yeah, I was gonna say we've run into maybe some challenges with we have a 24 channel analog board, and sometimes we like to punch above our weight, so to speak, and bring some national touring bands in. But I have to be cognizant of what does the tech writer look like along with this contract. It's interesting for us to think about, is this show even possible? Sometimes there's like a 2-band package. A lot of times that works out pretty well with string bands, but when you have a couple of drum kits and bass cabinets, I mean, if you've been to the Livery, it's a pretty small offloading area for the gear, and our green room is basically a closet. So stuff like that is heavily essential to just putting the show on. So that's kind of where my mind went at first. I'm sure others will elaborate on that.
Yeah, I'm thinking, like, if you're an artist making your own contract, you want to include also what you're gonna get. Like, are they feeding you? Is there, what kind of backline is needed, or what's the sound equipment? Are they selling your merch? Or are you selling it? Because when we make our offer contract, we say, okay, we'll feed you, we're gonna put you up homestay or hotel or whatever. We're gonna provide professional sound reinforcement. We'll sell your merch for 15% commission. And we've also included like your W-9 and payment info, promotional assets, your stage plot. Send us all of that kind of in one bundle, and we'll love you forever. So I've kind of, in the contracts that I've made, I just kind of like included links to these to have them send it back in a package, just like when we work with an agency, they send us all that together, so you don't have to go hunting for it.
Yeah, I think she said two really important pieces, which are backline and merch terms, because I think especially people that like don't tour nationally don't realize that there are some venues that take a percentage of your merch because they're selling it for you, or because they have expenses that are related to it. And so that's definitely something to make sure you include at all times, even if the venue doesn't say it to begin with. Clarify it with them and make sure that it's written down somewhere. Some of them even have ones where, like, if the venue sells it, they're taking a percentage, but if you sell it, they're not. And so it's an extremely important piece to have at hand, because if you want to sell your merch and keep all of it, then you need to make that decision. And it probably should be written down somewhere. And I will say, merch terms, to my understanding, most of the time are not negotiable for the most part. Some of them are, but it's something that's normally related to the venue. The venue has a certain expense level to sell the merch, and therefore the merch rate is normally the same for everyone. And then, yeah, backline. So if you're not familiar with, probably most of you are because you're musicians, but if you're not, backline is things that the venue can provide for you that aren't your instruments. So things that are related to your instruments, even, if it's a piano or something as such, basically stuff that you probably wouldn't want to travel in a small car with or fly with, the venue could potentially provide, but it is something that you want to work out in advance. Specifically, smaller venues, you got to make sure they actually have a PA system, because some of them do not. And these are all things to include in the contract, because if you show up and the PA is not there, then you got to figure out whose job it is to go get it. And if it's on the contract that the venue said that they were going to provide the PA, it's on them to call their friend to bring the PA for the show. And if it's not, it might be on you to try to find a rental company to grab a PA for. So those are two really important pieces.
Lara, it's funny you mentioned the PA stuff because we send out the same contract to everybody, and we got picked up for a number of different fair gigs around the state this year. And so you're kind of dealing with a board of people who aren't perhaps as accustomed to booking, bands as like a venue or like a talent buyer would be. And there were a number of situations where the contract said one thing about sound, and then 3 days before we found out that they didn't have it. So yeah, I mean, again, there's nothing that we can do from an artist perspective to like enforce the contract other than make them pay for it, But it's important to know who's running sound. It's important to know who's running lights. And Brandon, to your point about the tech rider, in those cases, the tech rider may or may not be relevant, because if they're not providing any of the tech, the rider doesn't mean anything to them. So perhaps sending that is another, reiteration of the fact that this is in your court now. This is your stuff. And then quickly to touch on the merch terms. I think another thing, Lara, I didn't have that on my list at all here. But one thing that I've noticed in the past, looking at bigger festivals, like some of these, like Nesty or Live Nation, festivals that you see across the country, they also want to set the price of your merchandise so that you're not underselling other artists, which is kind of an interesting way of approaching it, So not only are they going to take a percentage of it, but they're also going to perhaps price you out of being able to sell it. So, and perhaps there's a legitimate reason for that. I don't think we're going to find that answer here tonight, but I do want to turn it over to Scott, because Scott, you're probably maybe the intersection hasn't tried to take a piece of merch before, but you have big shows, and I can understand why, if there was a certain event, it would make, some sense there. But in terms of, the essential terms of a contract, like the basic understanding beyond that, what are you usually looking for? Anything that we haven't talked about yet?
No, I think what I would love to just see on the face of the contract is just all the things that were listed in the accepted offer. To me, what causes me the most trouble, I guess I would bring up a support budget. Sometimes I agree to pay somebody $10,000, and then I get a contract where there's like a $2,000 support budget written in. Now that does not happen all the time, but I'm old school. I'm like, the offer. What does the offer say? My manager will sometimes call me and I'll be like, no. Sometimes it's in the artist's favor. I know the agent has made an error and it's not correct. And we're like, no, settle it off of the offer because the agent accepted that offer. To me, all my issues, or a lot of our issues that are time consuming, are the additional terms and conditions, which are, they vary widely from agency to agency. They vary widely from promoter to promoter. We talked about that earlier, and I was trying to raise my hand. Like, I just had this conversation with a really large agency. I said, we keep arguing about the same thing. So why don't we come under our own terms and conditions? We probably buy $500,000 worth of talent from you. And I was basically told that we didn't do enough business with them to warrant our own terms and conditions, even though I saw their other terms and conditions on other contracts. So I don't know, it's a constant battle. I'm a little more old school. Like, I saw the email, I tracked it down. Here's what we said we agreed to. Settle the show on that. If there's any problems, I'm going to take care of it later. I will. So.
For sure. Well, and I think that brings up an interesting point too. The difference between the negotiation where that ended and what the contract says. And as a basic matter of law, it doesn't matter what you talked about in the emails if you've got a signed document that says something different, provided that it has certain boilerplate language in there that excluding that. And that would be common boilerplate language to say that this agreement is the entire agreement, and it reflects the parties' complete understanding regardless of any prior negotiations. Well, that can be troubling, because a lot of times people are just using one size fits all contracts anyway. Unless you're hiring a lawyer to redraft the contract for you every time, there's probably going to be inapplicable stuff. Which, yeah, I think comes back to the point that, the term sheet is perhaps the most important component of the contract. And the term sheet is kind of a term of art. It's not like there's actually, like how we refer to boilerplate language, like that's something that people know what that means typically, at least in the context of contracts. The term sheets just sort of more of a nebulous thing that I think is like, it could be handwritten and just stapled to the front of the contract. And as long as it's incorporated into the contract, like, okay, this is the date, this is the pay, this is when we start, this is how many sets, this is when we end. You know, anything else that's important to you should probably be on the term sheet. Otherwise, it may be disregarded, it seems. And that makes for a really easy reference too, right? On the topic of important terms, I think, you know, my band, we've had to sue, I think, like 2 people in the past 13 years over breaches of a booking agreement. And it's always been for non-payment, and it's always been a rather minuscule amount of money, but it's principle. And plus, I get angry when people do that. So, but it's always been about pay. You know what I mean? So, one thing that relates to pay, not only the total amount of pay, but also the terms and conditions of the payment. Is there a deposit required? When is the deposit due? How is payment to be made at the time of show? And maybe I'll turn it over to whoever wants to speak on this issue first. But what are you usually seeing, or what are you usually signing or putting into these contracts with respect to deposits and pay and whatnot?
I guess I'd grab that one too. That's a used to be a larger issue for us than it is now, but a lot of agencies wanted, you know, the deposit right at the announce, or 60 days out, or 30 days out. And I get 15 emails asking for the contract and the deposit. And we just went to a straight, here's our terms, this is what we're going to do, and we're not going to flex on it. So we'll send this much, 30 days out, and we'll send the balance day of, night of, next business, if the artist doesn't pick up a check. So I know that's different probably for every venue and every artist. It just depends on the background, the history of the venue. But I'd like to think that we're allowed to do that because we've been around a long time, and we just don't not pay artists. So it's less of a sticking point for us. Even though all the agent assistants like to remind me of the deposits like every 3 minutes. But anyways, yeah, no major issues there, other than I like to delay it. And I know some venues have ticketing deals where they're not even getting the ticketing money until after the event clears. And, I don't think it's fair that we send a bulk of that money in, especially today's world, until we know the show or feel comfortable the show is going to play out.
Yeah, I mean, from the artist side, and it's, this is like opening a whole can of worms, especially with deposits. There are some artists, basically I tell artists, if you want to collect deposits, let's do it. It should never be more than 30 days out right now because of the way of the world. It used to be, like Scott said, like, a lot of times they would ask for it on return of the contract, and I get why pre-COVID. But right now, 30 days is a lot to say, what's going to happen in 30 days, to be honest. So that's about as far as we go out. And then if we have a really good relationship with the venue, we've used them a lot, and we know that they pay on time, and we know that they're very good at negotiating reschedules or cancellations, then we don't bother with the deposit. However, it is, especially with a lot of venues attempting to cancel shows due to low ticket sales, which is not a force majeure, that deposit kind of gives them a little bit of a reason to renegotiate or reschedule instead of straight cancel. We find that, if money's already been put into it, not just the expenses on the marketing side and advertising side, but if the artist already has a little bit in their pocket, even if the venue just calls a cancellation completely, at least the artist is keeping a little bit of money, which on the artist side, I mean, like, I'm the only one here representing an artist, and I'm not currently a touring artist. So I'm a paltry representative of their current expenses. But I can say, guarantees are harder to come by right now because everything is so in flux, and we cannot figure out why people aren't going out to shows and why the ticket sales are so low. A lot of people are buying tickets like literally the day before, because they just don't know if they're going to be healthy enough to go out, or they're going to have enough money to go to the show at that point. But because of that, it causes a lot of uncertainty leading up to the actual tour. And a lot of artists are going out for an entire couple weeks, and they're routed, so collecting that deposit or insisting on that deposit at least says that they'll have enough for their flight, if they're doing a flight, their rental car, etc. So some artists are still collecting those deposits, but yeah, I would say right now, more than 30 days out, it just, I don't even think it's very reasonable for artists to be asking for that.
Caroline, Brandon, yeah, what's your take on deposits? Are your organizations usually seeing those demands come in?
Yeah, if there's a written contract being sent to us, typically the agency's requesting the deposit, and I always send it back saying, please waive the deposit. And that dated back to kind of the even pre-COVID. Just has been already said, we've been here for a while. We pay our artists in full. Most times it's a good reputation between ourselves, the artists, or ourselves and the agency. So it's really never been any, big pushback in that regard. And now moving into this kind of post-COVID world where shows are still being canceled, or the low attendance thing to me is pretty baffling for a venue to cancel on that regard, because I don't know about the rest of you guys, but pre-sale tickets are very hard to come by right now. We've had shows with no pre-sales that end up being packed, and shows with lots of pre-sales that don't get hardly any walk-up on top of that. So it's really not a very accurate barometer of what's going to transpire that night. But what Laura said pretty much was the nail on the head. Most of our ticket sales are within a day or two, or a day of the event. I think it's been a couple of years of people having their deposits for, tickets on hold and rescheduled. And it's just become kind of an anxiety for not just the talent buyer, but for the ticket buyer. Is this show going to happen? Will the artist be healthy? Will I be healthy? Is the venue going to not have any staff? So there's all these kind of anxieties and question marks and variables swirling right now. So in terms of a deposit, we've always tried to stay away from that and just pay the artist in full each night following the gate receipt reconciliation. But even more so now, and we haven't really seen a whole lot of pushback. I think we're all understanding of the current situation.
Yeah, I haven't tried that to say, hey, can we not do the deposit? So we're still issuing deposits. Usually if it's over, a certain threshold, if it's like a 2,000 or more guarantee for a show, we'll do that. And for the festival, it's a little bit of a higher threshold for deposits there. But we're certainly still trying to do that. We just had a reschedule that's finally coming up almost a year later, and that deposit's been hanging out for a year. So we're excited to do the show, but we're sitting at the same number of tickets where we were a year ago, and that this band's tour had to be rescheduled because of COVID. So we'd still love to present the show, but I do wonder, I'm like, well, what's worse, like a low turnout or just a cancellation? But we're certainly going to go for it, because you never know what the day of stuff is going to look like. And we're here to present music and support artists and just have stuff happening in our town. So we're just going to keep pushing.
It's also something too, just to talk on deposits, a lot of artists, like, especially if you're a higher artist, that you're getting checks or sometimes cash for large amounts of money per date. It's nice for them to have the deposit, so they're only collecting half of that. So if they don't lose a check, they're not down $5,000 where they're getting it like reissued. Which is one of the reasons that a few of my artists ask for a 50% deposit. Oh, and just so everyone knows, a lot of times you can either ask for, especially if it's an agency, they're going to be asking for the amount that the agency normally takes as commission. So like 10 or 15%. And then sometimes it's half. Right. So a lot of times, especially with festivals, in Caroline, I appreciate you saying that, because it really is, we collect a lot more deposits for festivals than we do for the shows, because a lot of times festivals are one-offs. We've reserved the entire weekend. One-offs meaning you're not routed around it. There are a lot more expenses involved in flying people out to a specific place. So it's a lot more riskier for the artist, and it's normally more money. So I would say that we do collect deposits more often for festivals than anything else, because it's just a lot more risk in general for the artist.
Well, and to piggyback off that, Lara, from an artist perspective, my band had an agent for many years, and when we were getting deposits, it was like, well, whatever, somebody else is handling it, it doesn't really matter anyway. But now that we're doing it, I can see where the value comes from, and I do realize the hardship that it might impose. I think that deposits become more important for us when we're not sure about the buyer. where it's like, yeah, this was kind of a strange request. Like, it doesn't look like you've done these a whole lot. Like, are you serious? And you can usually find out if somebody's serious by asking for a few $1,000s up front. Other folks, it's like, whatever, we've been there 1,000 times before, we're going to get paid. Or maybe like the pricing structure is different altogether and you don't know what half or what a certain percentage is. But I will say one struggle with asking for deposits and receiving deposits is you've got to always keep that money earmarked in your mind in the bank account, because you can have, $10, $20, $30,000 in your account for deposits. And if somebody gets sick or if something happens to your summer schedule, you got to send that money back. So you better not go spending it. You know what I mean? So I think that there becomes some accounting challenges there, but I guess the
I'd
point
say
of the
it's
deposit is
difficult
just
to
to secure it.
collect. It's difficult to collect deposits if you're not represented by an agency, because like we have like a deposit area, like we get deposits, it does not go anywhere, it just sits in the deposit area until the show plays, which is really how it needs to go. Especially like you said, you cannot put it in your regular bank account, because it's true, like a lot of times if the venue cancels, or even if there's a force majeure and it needs to be rescheduled, a lot of times you can keep that deposit. But absolutely, if a force majeure happens on the artist's end, that money needs to go back. Like, if you cancel it for whatever reason, you do not get to keep that deposit as the artist. So definitely, if you cannot handle like having a separate bank account for this stuff and not touching that money, don't ask for deposits. Just don't do it.
I think that's a really crucial issue too, because there are certain ways you can write up the deposit language in your contract that says that it's non-refundable upon receipt, or something like that. But like the legal language has got to be like really kind of crazy. Otherwise, the presumption is that it's a deposit and the money is to be held sort of in escrow. And if you go spending that money, you could be opening yourself up to like civil theft claims, which in Michigan allow someone to collect 3 times the amount of the damages. And you don't want to do that. Contracts are here to help avoid liability and to make sure people do the right thing under the law. Last thing you want to do is have a contract and then breach it to the maximum possible extent. Well, I wanted to hit on a couple of these other terms quickly. We got tech writers, hospitality writers. I think we kind of talked about the tech writer a little bit. Started talking about, first of all, tech writer is probably not going to be relevant unless the venue is providing sound and lights. And maybe the tech writer is a little bit too technical for us to get into right now. Although Brandon, I know you were talking about that earlier. When you as a talent buyer for a venue receive a tech writer that's just out of this world, like not applicable to you, just crossing stuff out. Are you spending a whole lot of time going through tech writers, and do you have any advice for musicians who are looking to put one together?
Yeah, absolutely. I understand that some bands aren't as tech savvy in getting an actual nice stage plot up and running for their EPK or anything like that. But at the minimum, we would love to have a input list. I think it's very empowering for our sound engineer team to be able to prepare and just know what to execute. I think that's really a professional aspect that might be overlooked in that contract. Is a venue really wants to know an accurate input list. I don't know how many bands, and no offense bands, but you kind of get last year's stage plot or input list, and then they're down a banjo player, they've added a keyboardist, and the gear shows up and we're kind of just standing there like, what the heck, this isn't what you sent us. So having that kind of tidy and in order is so appreciated by the venue, and especially my sound team. I don't know how many times they've rolled their eyes and chided me for not giving them an accurate input list or plot. But yeah, every single time, every show, we're always looking at at a bare minimum input list for the bigger shows. Before I even sign the contract, I want to see the tech writer to make sure it's possible. We do have some outside gear. We have an XR 18s. We can provide some additional channels, but without knowing and prepping that, it's kind of on the fly and not something that we like to do or be put in that under the gun position. So yeah, tech writer, input list, definitely important.
Great. Scott, when the intersection gets a tech writer, how do you usually handle that? Because I mean, you got a great system there, and it probably doesn't. You probably don't really want to change it up just for one act. How do you handle that?
I stamp it with all terms and conditions must comply with the offer. Here's our house specs. Like most of the time at our level, the agents know the room, what we have. Every once in a while, we'll get a request on a bigger show, like, hey, can you send over the room specs? But anything that we might be asked to provide, I'd like to see that on the front, when we're talking about that stuff on the first, the terms part, I like to see that there. And that's like a catch for us. Oh, this guy's expecting, us to rent a keyboard or something for them, but it's really not a huge issue for us. Most of the time, when our sound guys or they go to advance the show, then we really kind of get into the meat of that stuff. But I don't spend a ton of time on it unless my assistant goes through and like catches something that she knows, hey, this is really off. We don't ever do this. And then, then I'll take a peek at it, send the agent a note and say, this isn't really true, is it? Like most of the time it isn't, because you get different riders and yeah, it's not a huge issue for us for the most part, except when something is being asked of us that was not made clear at confirmation. So I guess we're talking about what you expect out of the venue. Like if you have anything out of the ordinary, and that might be simple to some and simple to others, but if you're expecting them to provide something that you're not carrying, that's got to get covered at some point.
Well, especially if your deal has what's called points afterwards, right? So it's after expenses. Like Caroline deals a lot in, we have a guarantee plus a certain amount of the ticket sales after expenses, but expenses include backline and expenses include anything in the tech rider that's going to cost them more money. So if you're not clear with your stage plot and your tech rider when you book the show, you might actually be unpleasantly surprised when you go to collect your check, when you find out the expenses were way more than you expected. So that is another thing too that is listed in the contract a lot, is that if a venue or a festival, not normally festivals, if venues say that you're getting a certain percentage after expenses, ask them what the expenses are. And a lot of times it'll be that there's a cap limit, but they're not sure because they're actual expenses. So it might be this much, but they're expecting, or estimated expenses. But it's really important to have that information just so that you can expect, you know what to expect, and you have that that walkout potential. What that is, if you sold out completely, what you could walk away with that night. It's really good to know what the cap of that is. And a lot of that does have to do with the actual expenses, including backline and hospitality sometimes.
Yeah. And all of this, I'm just like, coming back to that, all of this is about like you advocating for yourself as an artist, because a lot of you you don't have an agent who is kind of your advocate, and it's a lot harder for independent musicians to come at it from this angle of like, oh, I'm presenting you, I'm an independent artist with this writer, with this contract. Like, how cool is that if you start doing that, because a lot of us play, I'm a musician too, in breweries, or outdoor venues that aren't really prepared for you. So I'm now thinking about next summer. I'm like, I'm going to write, you must have tables and chairs cleared from the corner I'm going to play in next summer. Like something like that, like prepare for me, because I'm prepared for you. And we want the venue to treat you like you're a professional as well. And most of the time people are all well-meaning. They're just not used to dealing with musicians who have those kinds of expectations, because the agencies are usually working with venues that kind of have it together. But a lot of the independent people in Michigan might be playing venues that aren't used to those requests. So I think this is just super cool. And Chris, I had asked him earlier if you needed to be an established LLC to write a legally binding contract, because I'm like, oh, can anyone just do it? And he said, no, as long as it's clear who the legally responsible individual is. So right away.
That's right. And that's important. I mean, if we go back to the contract 101 component of this, your contract means nothing unless it's enforceable. I mean, beyond the fact that it might help lay out the facts. But if you want to enforce a contract, which is going to be a few and far between maneuver, you want to make sure that you've got parties that you can actually sue or who can be sued as a part of the contract. Like if I had a band called the Turkey Toms, I can't just put the Turkey Toms in the contract as a party, because who knows what that is? You wouldn't be able to find it anywhere. It could be Chris Newberg PKA Turkey Toms, or it could be this LLC PKA, professionally known as Turkey Toms, or something else. But when you're entering into contracts, you want to make sure you know who the other party is, and that's crucial. Just contract 101 stuff. We just kind of bounced off the tech rider. We talked about hospitality riders. Those are the historically popular riders you hear about that have all these crazy requests in them. I think, I kind of want to skim past that real quick because I know we're actually probably already 1 minute late here, and I don't want to hold you guys up too much. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, perhaps the most important hospitality rider issues are we getting food and drinks? Are we going to get hotel rooms? And do we have a runner, to drive us around? Otherwise, the brand of vodka you want or the brand of bottled water you want, if you have the balls to request that, go ahead, I guess, or the clout, but maybe it's not relevant for this audience.
Chris, one thing that I will say that you didn't mention that is really actually important is ADA concerns, mobility concerns, or anything where the artist needs something specific because of who they are as a person, which is extremely valid. And that is exactly where that goes. So like if you need to park within a certain space length from the venue to load in, load out, if you need assistance loading in and loading out, if you need handrails getting up to the stairs, if you need a ramp to get up to the stage, all of this is extremely important and should absolutely be something that the venue can cover. And it needs to be in that rider section. So that's another really, really important thing that a lot of times we don't think about, but those with mobility concerns or other ADA concerns, that's where that goes, and make sure that it is written in very clear language. Do not be afraid to write it in. It is something that is your right to write in, and that should be respected from the venue. Hopefully they can work with it, but that's where that goes. And it's really important to have it in there so that there are no surprises.
Absolutely. And I think that kind of brings us back to one of these key points that we've been making the whole time is, the contract is a legally binding document, but it's also the source of information for both parties. And if you've got a situation, whether it's because of a disability or just because of a time constraint or because of the size of your crew or whatever it might be, you want to let the venue know that, right? And there's no better way to do it than putting it in the document that everybody's going to be looking at when they go to reference the show. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense, Lara, and even like you talk about like parking location. We played Beaver Island Music Festival a number of times. It's absolutely amazing. It's just an amazing show. But sometimes you wonder how are we going to get our gear there? Got to put it in a van and try to get it on a boat and try to get it across. Like there can be challenges for some of these cooler shows sometimes that are maybe more out in the wild, but if you've got these limitations, you still need to be accommodated, of course. I want to think of a question to tie this all back around so we can all kind of like leave on a an informative note. And I think we talked about the difference between negotiating these types of contracts through an agent and individually, as the artist yourself. It seems like, the feeling of working directly with an artist is really nice, and Brandon, you kind of explained why that is. And really, you can kind of get to the heart of these matters a lot faster and without having to deal with like a cutthroat salesman like Lara here, you know what I mean? Just kidding, Lara, I'm not accusing you of such. But there's certainly a benefit to it as well, which Caroline pointed out, and then Scott pointed out as well, like, we get all this information. We get the term sheet, we get the contract, we get the W-9 all in one packet, and it's just super convenient. What can we tell people who are watching about how to make themselves as professional as possible when it comes to reaching out to talent buyers, negotiating these terms, and ultimately getting a deal? And I'm not asking for a long explanation, but if there's a few takeaways that you think we can provide folks, I'd be happy to hear them.
I don't know, for me personally, if we're talking about independent artists that are representing themselves and doing business here, is just get everything in writing. If we're not going to have a formal contract, and like if I say something in an email, at the end of the day, that's what I'm going to settle on. You know, you're going to get paid. And like you said, be professional. And it doesn't have to be a difficult negotiation. It can be really simple. Just make sure that you're clear on what you're getting paid, that there's some kind of written confirm of that. All the other stuff is great, but I would just say, you know, it's easy to have a phone conversation, then you forget about it, right? So I tell everybody, just send me an email, we'll write it all down, and then we're all clear.
Yeah, I think in that same sentiment, I think just some email etiquette goes a long way too from bands. I know with an agency, it's usually a nice heading with, you know, the band info, dates they're seeking. And of course, the agency will have all of the band's info right there, nice and neat for me. If you are an independent band, you know, make sure you put your band's name in the email subject. I don't know how many emails I get. It just says live music. You know, that's just so hard for me to search through the email and find, you know, your band again. I just have live music in the subject or no subject sometimes. So, you know, band, maybe some dates you're seeking, and then, you know, take a moment to kind of get your links in order and put everything right there and really accessible for me. And that's really the first step in even starting a negotiation, just making it easy for me to discover you. And that conversation will kind of start itself from there.
Yeah, that all seems just about right. I think you know, most musicians know that there are more artists than slots. And so sometimes that can just be really hard to, you know, to make those decisions and to sometimes let people down, or know that if we don't respond, that's not always because like we hate your band. And there's just like loads of volume that comes in, and it's pretty overwhelming, at least for me. So just like try to like be persistent and be patient, and provide all that information on the front end. And then when it comes time, if you are booked, to fill out the paperwork, which I know I'm bad at, but like at Blissfest, one of the complaints was that we had too much paperwork. And I'm like, I can't get rid of one, you know? So if you have all that stuff in advance, like the input list, like make that, have your headshots, have your bio, just kind of create that now for festival season or booking season and keep it all together so it's ready to go and you don't have to hunt for it every time. It might make it easier.
The one thing that I would say, and bringing it back to specifically contracts, for people without agents or people with agents looking for an agent, looking for a specific type of agent, right now, contracts, it's a really contentious environment right now for both venues and artists. Agents have become kind of the mediators of all of this. We have like the least stake in all of this stuff. So when contract questions come up on either side, agents are kind of the most removed. But if you do not have an agent, just remember, sure, you can sue someone, but if you've ever sued somebody, which I have in small claims court a couple times, it's a lot more than just getting that money back. This is a very small industry. Everybody knows each other. Just, I don't know if I can curse on here, but don't be an a-hole, okay? It's just, we're all in a really tough time right now. Just because you have a contract doesn't mean that you should immediately sue someone if they breach it, especially if it's a very small breach, and especially if it's something that is negotiable. Suing someone is absolutely the last resort, because it really does a lot of damage to everyone involved. So like when we're talking about contracts here, it's really important to have it, but really to me, even as an agent, it's not about the legality of the contract. It is just about a very comfortable way to start a conversation. If there is a disagreement at some point, it is a way to start the conversation. It is not where the conversation ends. So just use that document to protect yourselves. The venue is going to use it to protect themselves. But really, when it comes down to it, if there are contract disagreements, be kind, be a human being. Hopefully the venue will also do that, because we're all in a really difficult place right now. And it really does, like, especially with me, when I'm seeing venues breaching contracts, I work through it with them, but I might not use that venue again. I'm not going to sue them, But if there's another venue there that is easier to talk to, that's easier to renegotiate with, that has a more human side, I'm probably just going to use that venue in the future. And so it should be the same for you artists, you know, like if there's a venue that's being very difficult, don't use them again. But they're also going to think that way about you if you're being very difficult, even if you have a contract.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I again, I appreciate you all for coming out tonight. We covered a lot. There's always more to talk about. It always feels that way at the end of these, you know, and maybe we kind of came up with some new ideas for future B-sides. But gosh, I really appreciate you all, you know, taking the time out of your evenings to you know, be part of this tonight. You are all very influential in the Michigan music scene, and you know, the folks watching this, I'm confident we'll get a lot of good stuff out of it, and I've certainly appreciated it. And just want to say thank you to you all, and thank you to everybody who's watching. If you have any follow-up questions or anything like that, feel free to send a message to the Michigan Music Alliance via email. You can go to the website for that and find that all that information. Happy to help. You know, but maybe we should talk in the future about putting together at least the skeleton of a contract that both talent buyers and agents can get behind, you know, at least maybe the term sheet, the first page. So we can eliminate 80 or 90% of any uncertainty about these issues. That's all I've got. Unless anybody else has anything else to add, I guess we'll just see you all next time, and thanks for watching.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thanks all.